So welcome everybody to today's conversation on the power of reflection and feedback to drive instructional leadership. This is sort of part of a monthly series we do at TeachFX, conversations with education innovators. These are folks that are helping lead the way and creating more meaningful student engagement, advancing equity, facilitating deeper learning, and all those great things that we care about. So just a brief introduction of me. I'm Jamie Poskin. I'm the founder of TeachFX. I started my career teaching math and English in Harlem, New York. And
wow.
Wow. Yeah, 2 different subjects. I was also the athletic director of the school and coached 3 different varsity sports, and slept very little. So now I run an organization called TeachFX. Our mission at TeachFX is to promote more meaningful and more equitable classroom discourse. And the way we do that is by using voice AI technology to analyze classroom audio, and then provide feedback to educators on pedagogy and learning. And the whole idea is to supercharge kind of the entire instructional leadership process. So that's me. Today, I'm joined by the incomparable Danny Bauer, who's going to co-facilitate this conversation with me. So Danny has been a teacher, a school leader throughout his career, but I would say most of all, the guy is a storyteller. And he hosts a wonderful podcast, I hope you're all listeners, called Better Leaders, Better Schools. It ranks in the top 0.5% of 3 million global podcasts. He's really built something awesome there. He's also an author. His latest book is called Mastermind, Unlocking Talent Within Every School Leader, and it was published by Corwin and AASA, the National Superintendents Association. And Danny's mission is to connect, grow, and mentor every school leader who wants to level up. And Danny, do you want to just say a few more words about yourself and your work by way of introduction before we dive into today's topic?
I think you covered a lot of great stuff there, Jamie. So thank you for the warm welcome. I would encourage, right, if people enjoy podcasts, please check it out. It's called Better Leaders, Better Schools. The second one is a school leadership series. So the first one, Better Leaders, Better Schools, is a conversation like we're having now. We could put that out more in long form. School leadership series is 5 minutes or less, instant inspiration, on your way to work. And I want to end just with a lot of gratitude. It's kind of fun because Mitch with Organized Binder, Jamie with TeachFX, that's 2 of my 3 sponsors. So both of you have been such a great support. And Jamie, thank you for inviting me, to share a bit of my story today too. And thank you for being such a great friend and support as well.
Thanks, Danny. So we want today's conversation to truly be a conversation and not just a sit and get, as they say. So how we're going to start is by posing 3 questions to the group, and hearing each other's ideas about these 3 questions. Don't hesitate to chime in, raise your hand at any time. We'd love to hear your voice, but you can also add to the chat if you feel more comfortable there. And we'll talk about some of these questions, and then we'll take it from there. So the first one is, I'm going to pose all 3, and you can think about and answer whichever one you feel inspired to think about. So the first one is, what does it mean to create a reflective culture for the educators in your building? So you're putting your instructional leader hat on. What does it mean to create a reflective culture for your faculty? The second question is, what role should feedback play in your school's instructional culture? So you're thinking, again, in a more of an idealized way, like how should feedback function in a great instructional culture? And then the last question is, as an instructional leader, what are you doing now to create a culture of feedback and reflection at your school? So I'll put these 3 questions in the chat. Oh, that's formatted kind of funky, but I think it should work. Take a few moments to think, and if you feel inspired to share, please do.
All right. So my name is Nikki. I am from Orange County, California, and I generally start things off at my site. So why not here too? I think the reflective culture is basically what all of us as educators do on a daily basis. Like we spend hours planning a lesson that lasts maybe an hour, and then we stop and think, okay, at least at the high school level, all right, how did it go during first period? What changes do I need to make? What worked, went well, what didn't work well? And so as far as being a teacher leader and talking about our staff, like we have something called learning walks on our campus, and it allows us to go into other classrooms and reflect on our own teaching as far as, okay, what are some things that I saw in those other classes that I want to quote unquote steal? Because I said in an interview this morning that none of us invented the wheel. We're just modifying what works for us. And basically that comes down to reflection. And so of course, another component of the learning walks is the people who open up their classrooms. They're constantly saying, well, what did you think? What did you think? And it's like, well, it's not about you. It's about me. Like, what did I, as the walker, gain from being in another person's classroom? What did I see that the students appreciated, or what didn't work well for them? So, we're doing that within our own classrooms. And then as a culture, our entire staff are reflecting on what can I do better. Our district also put something out several years ago, like 5%, like no one's going to be perfect, but what can I take away to be 5% better? So as an instructional leader, I think we just have to be role models, be willing to open up, be willing to, participate, even if I get the answer wrong, or be willing to let people come and see what I'm doing, knowing that I'm going to mess up. And they may judge me, but that's part of my learning process. So I hope that covered most of the 3 questions.
If I could add something to Jamie. Yeah, thanks, Nikki. I'd like to suggest for this space right now, when I'm working with school leaders, I already tell them, listen, you've already got an A, okay? And so there's nothing you can do to earn it or to lose it. Like, you were picked to be here right now in this moment, exactly as how you are. So you can answer all 3, you can answer just one, answer it however you like, and that's going to be perfect for this moment. What I love what Nikki said too, and then I'll stop and see who else has thoughts that they'd like to add. The learning walks, right? Or we did instructional rounds at schools I've led. I think that's one of the biggest challenges and obstacles to doing them effectively is people take it personally, right? But it's not supposed to be personal. It's not supposed to be about that teacher. I mean, I get it. They're facilitating the learning experience in that moment. But it's like as a building, as a team, how are we thinking and wrestling with instruction? And how does that apply to actually my practice? It's supposed to be personal for you, the observer, not personal about like that guy, that person who messed up something or did a great job. So anyways, thank you for allowing me to share.
Okay. I'll share.
All right, Nikki,
somebody's
I've got to
going.
ask, because I'm an Orange County native who just moved to Tennessee about a year ago. Where are you in Orange County?
I am walking distance from Disneyland, or at least that's where our site is.
Okay, yeah, I went to Huntington Beach High School, went to Vanguard University, so I know that whole area very well. And it's been quite a change moving to Tennessee because we don't have the union supports that I loved in California. But I'm super excited because I found Danny and all his wonderful work, and I'm excited to work with him maybe later on this year. And my story basically with reflection is I've been both in an administrative as well as a teacher format, and reflection honestly looks the same each way. I think as an administrator, I see it in how would I as a teacher reflect upon something, how would I approach it? And that's how I approach my teachers, in that sense that I'm always the teacher first before an administrator. I think that reflection is not just speaking it out, but as Nikki had talked about, how you just think about how things have gone. But I also think it's really powerful to use it in PLCs. And I know that can be difficult for teachers because we don't want to say something didn't go well, because what we do is an art form, and to be criticized on your own art, your own creativity can be really difficult. Honestly, probably the best class I took in college was creative writing, because I learned how to take some of that reflection and feedback and really make my writing so much more fantastic. And I think creating that culture that it's safe, that you are supported in the things that you have to say, and that you have people who are there to say, hey, you know what? I tried this and this works so much better. And I love that whole idea of learning, the learning walking. I love it just as an educator, just because I get in, I go, gosh, she's so good at this, or he's so good at that. And the whole idea, if you can't steal in education, you're just in the wrong field. Because we always steal the great ideas from the great educators that we work with. So, and then when it comes to feedback, I mean, it can be positive. It can be something that's very complimentary. And sometimes we need that, you know, stern feedback that helps us become better educators. But I think the big part of it is just creating that culture of being safe to be able to share and receive that feedback.
Thank you, Danielle. Norma.
Hi, everyone. Does family in Huntington Beach count? Nice place to visit. So it's interesting, when I looked at your questions, Jamie, what does it mean to create that culture? What role does it play? And what are you doing? I'm really struck by how this is that elephant in the room, if you like, of time, right? It takes time to create a reflective culture, whether that's building the safe space or the relationships, or just letting the teachers know that it's time that they can have to slow down or redo or reflect, and not that it's this pacing schedule. And if you're not here by the time you get the state test. So, and I think that's also the role feedback can play, which I use with my teachers, is that it's a role to come back to, not just think about reflecting now and change it next year. What can we change now? Because I have 3 words that I give to students when they're giving feedback. It should be specific, it should be kind, and there should be actionable. It's not, so the role has to have some, you know, what do we do? I mean, we're really often, there's so many things to lament about in the educational space, but you know, what can we do about it, whether it's on a micro or a macro level? And then it's about collaboration. So I've heard about the learning walks and all that. We do learning labs. So it's a collaboration before you actually do a lesson. And then it could be the coach, it could be the teacher, it could be another teacher teaching in your classroom. And so that feedback is for everyone. That puts it back, as you know, someone was saying earlier, that it's not what I'm doing or what you're doing, it's what are we doing, and where are the students in all of that, you know, making it student centered. You know, what did we notice the students doing?
Yeah, Norma, I really appreciate your first comment, especially, I mean, everything you just said, but that first comment, I think, you know, we'd love to center this conversation around, well, how do we create the culture we want, right? I think we can all, I think, as educators and instructional leaders, describe what we want in some form or another, but creating that culture is challenging, as Danielle brought up. It's like, well, how do you create a culture where people feel safe to reflect and get feedback? It's hard. And I think your point about time, it's like, you know, I think about my time teaching, and there was no time baked into my schedule that was meant for reflection at all, you know. And same with feedback. I was never, you know, I always share, you know, I was never observed by another adult my entire teaching career. I was never given feedback. So I think you're bringing up some key points about the how. Well, if you have some rules around, hey, feedback needs to be specific, kind, and actionable, and we like feedback to be actionable now and not just a year from now. Those are like nice principles that you can communicate to your staff and say, this is how we do things here. It's part of our culture. All right, I see some other hands up. Toshila?
Yeah, Toshila. And hey, can I just call them out too? Norma, Toshila, and Ross. I like that you're using that hand function. And if you all don't know, down in reactions at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a raise hand function, and that'll just really queue up in a bigger space like this that you'd like something to say, and then normally you lowered your hand. So I just want to call that out. I appreciate that.
Okay, it's Tashala. So for
Sorry
me,
about that. Tashala.
yes, what it means to create a reflective culture for educators in the building is this is something that we strive to do on our campus, just to create a learning culture from each other, and a culture of where we as the practitioner are taking information that we receive from feedback and going back and reflecting on that. And so we also do the learning walks on our campus. We do pineapple charts where teachers post what they're going to be presenting on, anything new that they're going to do, and inviting others to their classrooms. But we also leave information behind for feedback. We use SIDME on our campus. So we do video coaching where teachers record themselves, and they don't always have to put their video in the huddle where it's a coaching cycle. A lot of our teachers just record themselves to go back and be reflective on their lessons and aha moments. And so when we do it as a coaching cycle, we have one particular look for. So each person may have a different look for something that they're working on just for them individually as a goal. And that's what we work on through that coaching cycle, where the videos are recorded and we're able to go in, give feedback. The teacher typically is reflective first. I'll look at a video, and then we come together and talk about what we saw, and then come up with another action plan for the next video. But throughout the entire process is for the teacher to be reflective. And even as a leader, I see feedback from my staff. Every week I send out a link seeking feedback for me to also be reflective of what's happening in the building or anything that I need to know about. And so I feel like that also helps with our teachers in them being vulnerable with reflection and feedback.
Yeah, creating that space for vulnerability is so key in creating a reflective culture that can use feedback effectively. Yeah, thank you for that. Ross.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. The part of the first question that sticks out when creating the culture, the part that resonates most with me in that is what does leadership do in the building? So you can have your district leadership across the board. Something that we tried a couple of years ago in some leadership workshops was teaching the leadership to develop a PD session that they are going to deliver the first week of school and workshops. And after that session, they're going to go and elicit feedback to show their staff that they're interested in the input, that they wanted to be vulnerable by doing that. So they show that this is this moment of growth. And then they can emulate that, hopefully, as it trickles down. So as we look at the system, the feedback has to be exemplified by the staff. And I've seen a couple of comments roll through about that I think David's been posting this idea of it's a risky environment. Let's just show what it means to be risky. Let's show actionable ways to do it again. So it's not as a thing where you're always the person giving the feedback as the district or school leadership, but you're a person that's part of the process.
Love that. So Dory, why don't we hear, since you have your hand up, hear from you. And then what I'd like to do after that is put folks into some breakout rooms to continue this conversation. And we'll actually share a Google Doc. I'll put it in here now, but I'll share it again, where we put these three questions. And what our goal here is to sort of that we all leave today with kind of a resource. People, I think Danielle brought up stealing. If you're not comfortable stealing, you shouldn't be in this profession. Well, that's kind of the point of today's conversation, is that we can steal ideas from each other. So what we'd like to do is, and I think Rachel from our team has already started kind of taking notes from what folks are saying right now. So feel free to go in there and if you want to add to those or add a link or whatever. But the idea is we're gonna put these ideas down in this doc that then we'll then share with everybody at the end of this conversation, so that it's not just a conversation, there's some action steps. So Dory, why don't you can make your comment, and then after that we'll probably move into these these groups?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to share that we also do instructional rounds in our district. And the question about how do you create that culture? When I think about that, what comes to my mind is something our superintendent says a lot. We have to be unwavering in our expectations, but flexible in our approach. And our district math and science team first came together 3 years ago. And as a former administrator, teacher, and coach in other districts, instructional rounds is something that I have facilitated, participated in before. And of all the professional learning I've ever done, it is by far the most effective. If there were a full-time job where I could just go from place to place and participate in rounds, I would sign up like today. And I remember at the beginning when we started this process, we started it with our math coaches at each school. And they were very uncomfortable with the idea because, like many of you have said, we've gone our whole career sometimes as teachers without being observed by other teachers. So it's understandable that it makes people nervous. And as the math coach in a school, if someone told me all the math coaches from the other schools were coming to do instructional rounds, I would think that's a reflection on me. So everybody was really nervous about the process, but it was the one thing that I was just unwavering about. We're going to do it, but how we do it is really up to you as the host school. So now here we are 3 years later, and it has just become the norm of how we do business in our math departments. Every month, we move our math coaches meeting to a different school, and it's just understood that the host school is hosting instructional rounds for the group. And then during the month in between meetings, that school, the coach will try to plan a time during their existing PLCs for teachers to visit each other. So over time, people become more comfortable with the process and they trust that, oh, this really is just an opportunity to reflect and to steal things. We do have teachers who request feedback, but we always reiterate that the purpose of the rounds is not to critique the teachers that we're observing. It's just for our own reflection and to think about what practices we should keep doing or maybe stop doing and just learning from each other.
Nice.
Thank you. Yeah, Dory.
Jamie, can I add one thing before we go to breakout?
Please.
So just to build and to connect a couple dots, because one of the questions we've been wrestling with is like, how do we create that culture, right? I really love, Dory, what you shared there. And it sounds like that's a fantastic culture that you've built, and now people are very comfortable with that. So ages ago, I was an instructional coach before moving into assistant principal position, and moved into like a high functioning school, right? But didn't have the relationships or the capital, right? And the trust to hold observations, give people feedback right away. So the thing that accelerated that process for me quickly was to invite the teachers I would provide feedback to my class, right? And so just say, hey, come watch me teach. Because as an instructional coach, I taught 2 or 3 classes and then had the rest of the time to observe and provide feedback to my peers. And I think you could do that as a principal or assistant principal as well. What if you taught a demo lesson, in some of these classes and said, okay, I'm going to knock the dust off and try it out, but I want the staff, you guys watch and give me feedback and what went well, where could I improve? And I think if you would do that, it would work wonders for your culture. David talked about risk tolerance, and having a sense of that. I think that's how I would approach it. So David, great question in the chat from a while ago. And Jamie, thanks for allowing me to share there.
Of course. Yeah. So as we go into rooms, I kind of hear 3 big themes emerging from this conversation. As we continue to think about these same questions and the challenges maybe to creating a reflective culture, to the challenges to creating a culture of feedback. One is this idea around risk or high stakes, like how do we, and vulnerability, like creating a reflective culture and creating a culture of feedback comes with this challenge, which is, how do you lower the stakes for the teacher to feel comfortable, the teachers that you're working with to feel comfortable. The time one was big. I think, Dory, your comment saying like, well, if I could do this full time, I mean, this is something that I became obsessed with, and why I started TeachFX was just the idea of like, can we leverage technology to save time in terms of feedback and reflection? How do we bake in the time into an already busy, workday for a teacher and for a school to actually carve out what arguably is the most important thing we do as educators? And then the other big theme that emerged, I think, in this preliminary discussion is around the type of feedback. What are we what are we giving feedback about? What are we reflecting on? Is it something that's actionable? Is it something that, as Nikki mentioned, I can be 5% better at tomorrow? Or is it something that, is not as kind or not as specific or actionable, right? So those were three themes that I felt like were emerging from this conversation. We're now going to send you into these breakout rooms. I'll put the document in the chat again. So open this up. You'll be using this to take notes on like what's said in your particular group. I think we put we'll have 5 groups. And so I think it will be obvious what group you're in. I'll let Rachel split us into groups, and we'll come back in maybe 5 to 7 minutes, maybe 7, let's say 7 minutes, so we can actually get some real conversation going. And then the idea is at the end, we'll kind of clean it up and send it out to all y'all.
Yeah, we're just co-creating a resource, right, that captures all the great value that we're talking about today.
Right, I guess we're back. Yeah, we have 20 more minutes, so I guess I would love to hear, and Danny, feel free to chime in too, but so you all can look at what other groups wrote as we discuss. I'm really curious what challenges came up in those conversations. That's just for me. And Danny, maybe you have some other guiding questions as we come back and push the conversation forward.
I think the challenge is continuing to build and create the community of feedback, and how to get those, particularly as we were talking, veteran teachers to trust you, that it's, not about them as a person, but more about getting our students to engage in the learning.
Thanks, Peter.
I don't know in group 1 if we found any challenges, but what we did say is that there is a need to be vulnerable and be open, and to demonstrate the accessibility to feedback. And we also discussed kind of modifying that term to feed forward as opposed to feedback. And then on top of that was to be reflective ourselves before we ask other people to be reflective. And in that reflective process, there's a vulnerability that just emerges, because if I'm saying to you, can you give me some feed forward, then I'm opening myself to what I'm asking you to open yourself up to from me.
I love that. And it's like a modeling approach. Danny, maybe you could say a little bit more about, I know you have a new program, the Principal Success Path, and it's built on kind of 4 pillars, and a couple of those I think are really relevant here. I feel like maybe you could chime in a little bit about how that works in your system.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And what's kind of neat, when leaders enroll themselves into that program, I tell them there's 4 pillars, and pillar 1 is collaboration, 2 is execution, shipping your work. There's 13 projects you do in 5 weeks. Pillar 3 is generous feedback, right? So you are encouraged and challenged to provide feedback to your peers on every project, at least 5 minimally. And that means you're going to be receiving a lot of feedback too. And then the cherry on top with pillar 4 is reflection, where you solidify your learning. And so what I tell people who enroll themselves in that program is like, steal that process, right? You can, collaboration's great, execution, that is very important to get anything done within any school. But almost like, at that meta level, how are you encouraging and challenging your staff to provide what I call generous feedback, generous in that it is going to push and challenge and help people, what I call level up. But somebody mentioned before too, it might've been Norma, I think it was talking about the idea of kind as well. You can challenge someone and say, listen, you really have to grow in this area, but you can do it in a compassionate way. And what we try to do is just create that space where people can practice, right? So we've talked about safety, we've talked about trust. I like that, Jamie, feedback as a gift, right? So that's one level. And then the next piece is, okay, now that you've received it, right? What are you going to do with it? And that's such an important part, because just like being here and being inspired by this conversation and meeting some of your colleagues, if you don't do anything with what you learned today and what we discussed, like, why did we do it? So that's me. One of my superpowers is action. So reflect, figure out how you're going to make it real. Hopefully that helps, Jamie.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's really telling the folks I talked to who have worked with you, Danny, had such powerful learning experiences as instructional leaders. And it's kind of like, right, it's in part, a big part of that is because of the structure and the culture of the program you've created. And why can't we have that same culture in our school buildings that we lead? It's where literally half of your process is around feedback and reflection. And that's built into the structure of how adult learning is happening.
If I can I add to that too? And so we just talked about like 4 pillars, right? And the 4th pillar was reflection. So I got that in there for you all. When you're talking to your people as well, whether it's from like the local school level, or Frank's at the state level, so whatever your system is, you should really highly consider like, what is your framework? Are there steps, are there pillars? And like maybe 3 to 5, 7's really pushing it, but no more than that. And I don't want to, I can riff on this forever, but I won't. Okay, I promise you. Education does a really bad job of adding without subtracting, right?
Yes.
But you as a leader, and even as classroom teacher, you're a leader as well. You have to create a little ruckus and resist that sometimes, okay? But back to the pillars or the steps, if you can articulate what your school is all about to your community, to your staff, right, to your students, wouldn't that provide a lot of clarity and excitement and momentum within your building? And so all I'm suggesting is identify what that is for you, and maybe build that on the foundation of feedback and reflection.
Anyone else from the breakout rooms want to share where the conversation went?
It went fast.
I think, Jamie, for me, one of the takeaways is in light of what you and Danny are kind of discussing, or what Danny's riffing on right now, is having it be, and this came up in our breakout room as well, just part of the way things, part of the structures. So having walkthroughs or observations and feedback and all of that not be something you have to work to plan or make happen. It's just kind of part of the structure, if that makes any sense. I experienced that something similar, a Japanese lesson study with a cohort of about 8 teachers years ago. And it was it's a design where we got together and co-created one lesson. And then one of the members of the team would teach it, and everyone else in the team is in the room during the lesson with clipboards, just feverishly taking notes and checking in with kids. And then we would get together and redesign it based on that feedback and iterate and iterate and iterate. And the idea is that by the end, you have one really polished lesson, but it did help create, it just was part of the structure of what we were doing, and helped create a school-wide culture of popping in somebody's room. It's literally the best PD teachers can do, is watch other people teach. And we so rarely do it because we don't have the time. So.
Thanks, Mitch, for sharing that. Hey, let me ask you too, Jamie. I'm really curious. So we've built a relationship and we have trust, and I love that, you know, you've been sponsoring the podcast. And but here's, and this is sort of like a meta thing for everybody on the call too. Nobody's going to care as much about your thing. So if that's your school or your company, like TeachFX or Organized Binder or Better Leaders, Better Schools. Nobody's going to care as much as like the person who started it or is leading it currently. So although I know a lot, I think, about TeachFX, I'm not going to know it like you. So I'm curious, you know, how would you describe like how reflection and feedback factor into the TeachFX work, right, with your schools and districts?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said, Danny, really captures the heart of it, which is in education, we're used to adding more and more things. And what we're really trying to do at TeachFX and what we've done with our partners is create a new way to do reflection and feedback and to do instructional leadership. And so, and a lot of the themes that have come up here today really, you know, they speak to my heart because we're trying to solve a lot of these challenges. So when folks work with us, we'll have a reset about, well, what's the data? Like, if you're going to reflect on something, what is the thing that you're reflecting on? You know, right now, typically teachers are spending over 40 hours a year reflecting on assessment data, even though there's no evidence that that changes teaching and learning at all. Because of our technology is able to measure the actual discourse patterns in the classroom, when we first meet a school leader, we'll think together about what their instructional priorities are and what they want teachers reflecting on. So if we're going to have a continuous improvement process, is it about, you know, what's it about? So they might pick something that our technology measures, like the level of questioning, or our students asking questions, or our teachers demonstrating uptake or building on student contributions. Are they using high leverage teaching strategies like wait time? And then those become the site-wide data that then teachers reflect on in their own experience. So it really replaces a lot of what happens today in PLCs or in professional learning communities. And it does it in a way that's like way less work for a teacher, because our app is, you know, their teachers record their class with our app and they can pick whatever they record. The app analyzes their class, and the real engine of change of what we're doing is that reflective moment that the teachers get when they see our data. And so, you know, it's really core to what we do, Danny. And I think creating that new system rather than layering on one more thing. I mean, we're responding to the challenges that have come up around time, around the vulnerability, like by making it something that's private that a teacher can do for themselves and they can share if they want. It really lowers the bar for what it means for a teacher to get feedback. If all I have to do is press a button and the data collection is done automatically and it's private to me, and I'm only asked to spend a minute or two, 5 maybe, reflecting, that's a lot easier to do than inviting 9 people into my room to watch me teach for an hour. So yeah, I mean, that's how we think about it at TeachFX. I wonder if others in our last 8 minutes here have other ideas that have emerged from this conversation, something new that you want to try, something new that you want to think about in your setting.
Well, what I do want to share is, Jamie, you and I have worked, together most recently. I'm with Advanced Strategies for Professional Development in Chicago, and we do graduate courses that teachers need for their ESL and bilingual endorsements. And we got a grant from the U.S. Department of Ed this year, excuse me. And we integrated TeachFX into that to get teachers of English learners to begin not only to look at what's going on with exchanges in the classroom, but the quality of the dialogue and the discourse, looking at the words and phrases, the sentences and language patterns, and then the general discourse patterns. And so with all of that, we're looking forward. We haven't launched it yet. That's going to be in year 2 of the grant. It's a 5-year grant. And so we're looking forward to having some really interesting results for not knowing what they're going to be. But I personally believe that they're going to be strong ways to help teachers to really begin to think about the academic language, specifically the academic language that is used in their classrooms among language learners. So, when you talk about a potential use, I would encourage people to dig deeper into the language, not just the exchanges. And so we'll have some data that's going to be coming out about that over the next few years.
And just for those who aren't as familiar with TeachFX, Mike's referring to one of our insights provides a word cloud of what the teacher said and a word cloud of what the student said and kind of what the most common phrases were, as like a very quick way for a teacher to reflect on whether the academic vocabulary they were looking for was present in the classroom, and then kind of plan and give themselves feedback going forward. Others sort of takeaways or where you want to go with this? Like, is this giving you a new idea that you didn't have when you came in today? Oh, we have David sharing the screen. Yeah.
David's taken over.
So as far as taking action, I think one of the things moving forward as a teacher leader would be kind of guiding self-reflection for staff. Like I said earlier, we aren't recreating anything. Our staff members need that diction, that growth mindset of what you're doing is good, but how can we make it better? How can we improve on what we're already doing? Because you had also mentioned like it's new things over and over again and nothing is taken off. So sometimes we need to just do that self-care of this isn't anything new. It's just improving what you're already doing. So kind of guiding that reflection. And David had said something about the fact that I've used TeachFX in the classroom. You've pretty much touched on everything. It's the teacher talk time versus student talk time. We as teachers, especially in a short day, and we have a ton of lesson content to cover in a period, it's really easy for us to be like, okay, it's been quiet for 10 seconds. Let me answer for them instead of giving that think time or that wait time. And then of course, especially with EL learners, are they using the academic vocabulary that is being targeted? So I think my actionable step from today is having my teachers or my staff, do that self-reflection of, okay, yes, I'm good at my job. All these things are things that I'm already doing. It's nothing new, but how can I improve on that? And we've gotten a lot of good work with David all year long with regards to student voice and purpose and the types of questions that we're asking. Are we asking open-ended questions or yes or no questions? And so getting the students to reflect as well is one of the cool things that the TeachFX app uses or provides for us. And then on a side note, Jamie, I think after you presented in Anaheim Union High School District, I was able to kind of show off your app during a district staff meeting. And so it was interesting to see, okay, if the meeting was about our campus, how much did the district people allow our staff to talk versus how much they spoke? So they got to see it in action as well. But thank you.
I love that. That's great. Yeah, it's like, let's model the kind of discourse we want in our leadership, our staff meetings, right? That we would want in the classroom. It's great.
Wonderful, Nikki. I'd love to end us here on time. I know it's a bit early, so we're going to do that. I was taught by Priya Parker, who wrote a great book on gathering, never end with logistics or start with them. So Rachel or Jamie, I don't know if there's any sort of logistics. If you have any, now's the time. And
yeah,
then,
let's do. I think most people here are, well, a lot of the folks here are already partners of TeachFX, but obviously if you aren't, I'm happy to stick around after if you want to learn more. I think same goes for Danny and the mastermind. If, I think some of you are already familiar with his work. supporting school leaders. But if you're interested in learning more from Danny about the mastermind and the principal success path that he mentioned, obviously feel free to stick around afterward and we can chat more. Becky from our team just put her email in the chat as well. So on the logistical side, we'll just say we'll hang around. Feel free to reach out, but I'll hand it back to you, Danny, to close things with non-logistics.
All right, brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. So I love to end, and we're going to model reflection. And if you know me, like I always end everything I do with this, and it's in the chat. So we're not going to come off. Yeah, Mike, I'll get that in there. We're not going to come off mute for this just because of function of time. But if you can 30-second reflect, right? And then type in the chat, just what was your number one insight for today? Mike talked about collaboration, reflection, and dialogue. Jamie on what you can do now, right? Not having to wait till next year. Frank reinforcing the need to model reflection. Yeah. Danielle making the pillars of the school known. All right. Melissa building reflection time into teacher schedule. Norma, great to hear from leaders thinking about reflection and supporting student experience. Keep the reflections coming, and I know we're at time. So if you're going to stick around, stick around. If you need to go, thank you. Like I have so much gratitude for you being here too.
And thank you, Danny, for joining us. It's a pleasure as always. And thank you everyone for your wonderful contributions to this discourse.